Think the history books tell all? What if the biggest secrets, the game-changing discoveries, were deliberately hidden? Don't miss out on the 5 explosive truths they never wanted you to find. Welcome to the Purple Files. If you enjoy our videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get right into it. Our journey into the forbidden begins at perhaps the most iconic and enigmatic location on Earth. The Giza Plateau in Egypt, home to the Great Pyramid and the majestic Sphinx. For generations, we've been taught a straightforward, almost deceptively simple story. The Sphinx, that colossal lion-bodied human-headed statue, was carved by the pharaoh Khafre around 2,500 years before the Christian era. A silent, eternal guardian for his pyramid complex. The Great Pyramids themselves, those breathtaking marvels of engineering that pierce the desert sky, are attributed to pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. They were built as grand tombs over a period of mere decades, a testament to their power and divine status. This is the narrative, etched into countless textbooks, proclaimed with authority by tour guides, and fiercely defended by the gatekeepers of mainstream Egyptology. But what if this story, so neat and tidy, so universally accepted, has some colossal, undeniable cracks? What if the stones themselves, weathered by millennia, whisper a different, far older, and infinitely more complex tale? Anomalies abound, challenging the very foundations of this orthodox timeline. Consider the sheer scale and almost unbelievable precision of these structures, which seem to defy the supposed tools and logistical capabilities of the era. How were multi-ton blocks quarried, transported, and lifted with such accuracy, using only copper chisels and stone hammers? Then there's the curious lack of contemporary inscriptions, the kind of boastful hieroglyphs definitively claiming credit for these specific colossal undertakings, especially in the way later pharaohs meticulously documented their far lesser achievements. The official timeline feels increasingly strained, almost brittle, when confronted with the enduring, profound mysteries these ancient monuments present to us even today. One of the most profound and scientifically grounded challenges to the orthodox dating of the Sphinx came not from within the ranks of Egyptology, but from an outsider, a geologist named Dr. Robert Schoch. His involvement was prompted by the persistent work of John Anthony West, an independent researcher and author. West had long been fascinated by the distinct, peculiar weathering patterns visible on the body of the Sphinx, and, crucially, on the walls of its enclosure, an enclosure carved directly from the bedrock. He observed that these patterns looked strikingly different from the wind and sand erosion typically seen on other Giza monuments, which are also thousands of years old. Instead, they spoke of something far more ancient and elemental. Significant, prolonged exposure to rainfall. Dr. Schoch's detailed geological analysis, first presented to the academic world in the early 1990s, sent immediate shockwaves through the established circles of Egyptology. He meticulously examined the limestone, concluding that the deep vertical fissures, the rounded, undulating and scalloped profile of the Sphinx's body and the enclosure walls were undeniably characteristic of precipitation-induced weathering over vast timescales. But here's the scientific bombshell. The Giza Plateau, now part of the arid Sahara Desert, hasn't experienced that kind of sustained heavy rainfall since long before the currently accepted age of the Sphinx. The last period of such wet climatic conditions in that region dates back to at least 5,000 years before the Christian era, and quite possibly as far back as 10,000 years before the Christian era, or even earlier, during a period known as the African Humid period. This wasn't just a minor chronological discrepancy that could be easily explained away. This was hard geological evidence, suggesting the Sphinx could be thousands, perhaps even 7,000 or more years older than previously believed. This would place its origins deep in uncharted prehistory, predating the known Egyptian civilization by an immense, almost incomprehensible margin. The implications were, and continue to be, absolutely staggering. Who or what culture could have possessed the skill and organization to carve such a monumental statue, so incredibly deep in our forgotten past. Adding another compelling, though admittedly more interpretive layer to this chronological puzzle is the fascinating work of Robert Bauval, an engineer by training with a profound passion for ancient astronomy, and author Graham Hancock, known for his explorations of lost civilization. Bauval, while studying the Giza Plateau, was struck by an observation. The layout of the three main Giza pyramids, those attributed to Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, seem to uncannily mirror the arrangement of the three prominent stars in Orion's belt. It wasn't just their relative positions on the ground, but also their differing sizes and apparent brightness seemed to correspond to the celestial originals. However, the alignment wasn't perfect if one assumed the conventional construction date of around 2,500 years before the Christian era. Intrigued, Bauval utilized astronomical software to track the slow, cyclical shift of constellations across the night sky over millennia. This movement is due to a phenomenon called precession, a gradual wobble in Earth's rotational axis that completes a full cycle roughly every 25,920 years. As they wound back the celestial clock, they discovered a period when the alignment between the pyramids and Orion's belt was breathtakingly precise, almost a perfect terrestrial map. That remote epoch? Around 10,500 years before the Christian era. At this incredibly ancient date, the pyramids on the ground would have perfectly mimicked the position and orientation of Orion's belt as it crossed the meridian. Significantly, the Great Sphinx, facing due east, would have gazed directly at its own celestial counterpart on the vernal equinox, the constellation Leo, as it rose helically at dawn. Graham Hancock further elaborated on this, arguing that this dual alignment was not mere coincidence, but a deliberate, sophisticated plan, a grand marker left by a highly advanced, astronomically aware culture that understood these vast cycles of time. This theory, which became widely known as the Orion Correlation Theory, or OCT, suggests the entire Giza complex might be a terrestrial map of the heavens, pointing to a specific, incredibly ancient first time, or Zeb Tepi, as some ancient Egyptian texts allude to. So what are the monumental implications if we dare to accept these lines of evidence? If the Great Sphinx indeed bears the unmistakable scars of ancient reigns from a forgotten, wetter era, and if the pyramids truly align with the stars of a sky as it appeared 12,500 years ago, then the very bedrock of our understanding of the past begins to crumble. It points directly towards a possibility that mainstream history and archaeology have vehemently and often emotionally rejected: the existence of a highly advanced, organized, and sophisticated human civilization, flourishing thousands of years before Sumer, thousands of years before dynastic Egypt, thousands of years before what we are traditionally taught was the dawn of civilization. We would be forced to consider a culture capable not only of monumental architecture and breathtakingly precise engineering, but also possessing a profound and nuanced understanding of astronomy and vast cosmic cycles. This isn't just about redating a few ancient stones in the desert. It's about the necessity of rewriting the entire accepted story of human origins, our societal development, and our intellectual journey. Could there have been a lost mother culture, a predecessor to all known ancient civilizations? Perhaps one that was largely, if not entirely, wiped out by a global cataclysm? The time frame of 10,500 years before the Christian era is particularly intriguing, as it coincides with the end of the last ice age and the Younger Dryas climate event, a period of intense global upheaval, rising sea levels and proponents of this idea, like Graham Hancock, suggest that survivors of such a cataclysm might have scattered across the globe, carrying with them fragments of their advanced knowledge, which then acted as a seed for the later, seemingly sudden rise of civilizations like Egypt and Sumer. These known ancient cultures, in this alternative view, might have inherited and attempted to emulate a far older, far grander legacy. The Giza complex, therefore, could be seen not just as tombs for pharaohs, but as a profound testament, a deliberate message, encoded in stone and aligned with the stars, reaching out across the abyss of time from this lost, primordial epoch. Unsurprisingly, these revolutionary theories, challenging decades of entrenched academic consensus, have faced, and continue to face, immense, often fierce resistance from the majority of conventional Egyptologists and archaeologists. The established timeline for ancient Egypt, particularly the 4th dynasty, is a cornerstone of ancient history, meticulously constructed over generations of research. To suggest it's fundamentally flawed, off by not just centuries but several millennia, is considered academic heresy by many within the mainstream. Critics frequently attempt to dismiss the compelling water erosion evidence on the Sphinx by proposing alternative, localized explanations such as Nile floodwaters, despite Giza's elevation, halite crystal activity, or atmospheric condensation. However, these often fall short of comprehensively explaining the pervasive nature and specific characteristics of the weathering observed by geologists like Dr. Shu. The Orion correlation theory is often labeled dismissively as pseudo-archaeology or archaeoastronomy. Arguments are made that apparent alignments can be found anywhere if one looks hard enough, or that the ancient Egyptians of the supposed earlier period simply wouldn't have possessed the intellectual capacity or societal motivation for such grand long-term celestial schemes. The very narrative of a lost super-civilization is frequently ridiculed as romantic fantasy, akin to tales of Atlantis, lacking what they consider concrete, unambiguous archaeological proof, such as directly dated pottery shards, tools, or settlements from that specific period found in situ at Giza. Yet, despite the dismissals and the often acrimonious debate, the fundamental questions raised by the anomalies at Giza linger powerfully. The stones themselves seem to mock our certainty. Is the staunch resistance rooted purely in a rigorous, objective pursuit of scientific truth? Or is there an element of reluctance to overturn decades, even centuries of accepted dogma which would necessitate rewriting countless history books and re-evaluating entire careers? The Sphinx and the pyramids remain silent, enigmatic sentinels, challenging us all to look deeper, to question further, and to consider possibilities that lie far beyond the comfortable confines of the official story. We now turn our attention from the sun-baked stones of Egypt to a mystery that whispers from the very soil beneath our feet, particularly across the Americas. The persistent, unsettling accounts of giant human skeletons. These are not tales confined to ancient, dimly remembered myths of titans or cyclopes, though those legends certainly echo in the background. Instead, we find a surprisingly robust trail of reports, especially prominent in the 19th and early 20th centuries, documented in local newspapers, town histories, and even some early archaeological field notes. These accounts speak of the unearthing of human remains of extraordinary size. Skeletons reportedly measuring 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet, and in some more sensational cases, even 12 feet or more in height. These discoveries were not isolated incidents, attributed to a single region or a lone, imaginative reporter. They emerged from burial mounds in the Ohio Valley, from ancient graves in New York State, from caves in the Southwest, and from numerous other locations across the continent. The descriptions often included details like double rows of teeth, unusually thick skulls, and sometimes artifacts buried alongside these towering figures that hinted at a sophisticated, albeit unknown, culture. Many of these newspaper articles, often dismissed today as mere sensationalism or yellow journalism characteristic of the era, were nonetheless presented at the time as factual accounts of local events. They named witnesses, described the specific locations of the finds, and detailed the disposition of the remains, which quite often involved a familiar name, the Smithsonian Institution. This is where the narrative takes a darker, more a conspiratorial turn. According to a multitude of these historical accounts and a persistent belief system that thrives to this day, representatives of the Smithsonian or individuals claiming to act on its behalf would frequently arrive at the sites of these discoveries. They would collect the oversized bones, often with promises of further study and public display. However, the allegation is that these giant skeletons, once taken into the custody of such esteemed institutions, effectively vanished from the public record. They were not put on display, they were not catalogued in accessible museum databases, they simply disappeared, leading to the enduring accusation of a deliberate, systematic cover-up orchestrated at the highest levels of the scientific establishment. But why would an institution dedicated to the increase and diffusion of knowledge like the Smithsonian actively suppress such paradigm-shattering discoveries? Proponents of the cover-up theory offer several compelling, albeit controversial motives. One primary argument is that the existence of a race of giant humans, particularly in North America, would fundamentally contradict the then emerging and now firmly established Darwinian theory of evolution. Human evolution was, and largely still is, depicted as a relatively linear progression. Giant humans simply didn't fit neatly into this developing narrative and could have been seen as an inconvenient anomaly that threatened to complicate or even discredit the broader scientific understanding of human origins. Another powerful motive, often intertwined with the first, relates to the desire to protect a specific, controlled narrative of Native American history and origins. The mound builder cultures of North America were already a subject of intense debate, with some 19th century theories attempting to attribute their sophisticated earthworks to a vanished race. Separate from contemporary Native American populations, the discovery of giant skeletons within these mounds could have further complicated these narratives, potentially lending credence to theories that were politically or ideologically inconvenient, or that challenged the prevailing doctrines regarding the peopling of the Americas and the capabilities of its indigenous inhabitants. Some researchers suggest that acknowledging giants would open the door to literal interpretations of biblical texts, such as references to the Nephilim, which the scientific community was keen to distance itself from. The sheer volume of these historical reports is striking. While any single account might be dismissed as a tall tale or a misinterpretation, perhaps mistaking a normal-sized individual in a flexed burial for a giant or misidentifying large animal bones, the cumulative weight of hundreds of similar stories from diverse locations becomes harder to ignore completely. Researchers like Jim Vieira have dedicated years to combing through historical archives, unearthing countless such newspaper clippings and local histories that all tell a similar story. Large skeletons found, often measured and witnessed by multiple local citizens, and then frequently taken away by academics or government agents, never to be seen again. The central, frustrating question for those who believe in the existence of these giants and the subsequent cover-up is, where did all the bones go? If hundreds, perhaps thousands of such skeletons were unearthed, why is there not a single undisputed example on display in any major museum in the world? Skeptics argue that the lack of physical evidence is proof itself that these giants never existed, that the stories were exaggerations, hoaxes, or misidentifications of mastodon bones or other large fauna. They point to the lack of rigorous scientific excavation and documentation by modern standards in many of these older accounts. However, the proponents counter that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially if that evidence was systematically collected and then deliberately hidden or even destroyed. They point to anecdotal accounts of Smithsonian employees being ordered to dispose of anomalous skeletal material, though concrete proof of such directives remains elusive and highly contentious. There have been alleged deathbed confessions from individuals claiming to have participated in the destruction of such remains, and Freedom of Information Act requests have been filed seeking records from the Smithsonian, generally yielding little in the way of smoking guns, which supporters of the theory claim is evidence of how deep the cover-up truly runs. The debate often becomes highly polarized. On one side, you have a scientific establishment that largely dismisses the entire notion of giant skeletons as folklore or 19th century pseudoscience. On the other, a passionate community of independent researchers and believers who see a deliberate conspiracy to hide a crucial part of human history. They argue that the Smithsonian and other institutions like it acted as gatekeepers of an acceptable historical narrative, and anything that didn't fit, like 7 or 8 foot tall humans who might rewrite our understanding of the past, was quietly removed from the equation. The allure of the giant skeleton mystery endures, fueled by these historical accounts and the tantalizing possibility that a hidden chapter of human existence has been deliberately obscured from us. It taps into a deep-seated fascination with the unknown and a suspicion that official narratives may not always tell the complete story. Were there truly giants who once roamed the earth, their existence erased from our history books by a concerted effort to protect established paradigms? Or are these tales simply the product of misinterpretation, exaggeration, and the human love for a good, mysterious story? Without definitive, irrefutable physical evidence brought forth from the archives of institutions like the Smithsonian, the alleged cover-up of giant skeletons will likely remain one of the most enduring and hotly debated forbidden topics in the annals of archaeology, a shadowy testament to what might have been, or perhaps what is still hidden. All right, let's journey to 3 more astonishing sites that seem to defy conventional explanations, presenting us with what many call impossible ancient machining. These are places where the stone itself seems to scream of a technology far beyond the grasp of the civilizations officially credited with their construction. Our first stop takes us high into the Bolivian Andes, to an altitude of nearly 13,000 feet, to the enigmatic ruins of Puma Punku. Officially part of the larger Tiwanaku archaeological site, Puma Punku is unlike anything else found in the ancient world. It's a scene of bewildering devastation, with massive, intricately carved stone blocks scattered across the landscape as if by a cataclysmic force. The official narrative attributes Puma Punku to the Tiwanaku culture, flourishing between roughly 300 and 1000 of the Christian era. But the stones themselves tell a potentially different, far more advanced story. We're not talking about simple, rough-hewn blocks here. Many of the stones at Puma Punku are made of andesite and diorite, incredibly hard volcanic rocks that are extremely difficult to work even with modern tools. Yet, these blocks exhibit breathtaking precision. We see perfectly flat surfaces, almost polished to a mirror shine, intricate 90-degree interior and exterior angles, and complex, interlocking shapes that fit together with a seamlessness that rivals modern construction. Some of the most famous features are the H-Joule blocks, massive andesite structures weighing many tons, carved with multiple precise planes and grooves. There are also incredibly fine, almost impossibly small drill holes found in some of these hard stone blocks, suggesting a drilling technology that seems utterly out of place for the supposed time frame and toolset. How could a civilization, believed to have lacked writing and the wheel, and equipped primarily with stone hammers, bronze chisels, and obsidian tools, achieve such feats of engineering? The sheer precision and the hardness of the material have led many researchers to suggest that some form of lost, advanced machining technology must have been employed here. The idea of slowly grinding these features into existence with primitive tools seems, to many, an insufficient explanation for the observed results. Next, we travel across the globe to Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon, home to one of the most impressive Roman temple complexes ever built. While the Roman temples themselves are magnificent, it's the foundation upon which parts of the Temple of Jupiter stand that truly boggles the mind and fuels speculation about lost technologies. Beneath the Roman structure lies a podium, or retaining wall, that incorporates some of the largest worked stones on the entire planet. Most famous among these are the 3 colossal monoliths known as the Trilithon. Each of these 3 stones measures approximately 63 to 64 feet long, around 14 feet high, and 12 feet thick. Their estimated weight? 800 tons apiece. These 3 immense blocks were quarried, somehow transported over a significant distance, and then lifted more than 20 feet into the air to be placed with remarkable precision in the temple's foundation wall. The engineering feat required for this is almost beyond comprehension, even for the renowned Roman engineers. But the mystery deepens. In a nearby quarry, about a quarter of a mile away, lies an even larger stone, famously known as the Hajar al-Hibla, or the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. This monolith, still attached to the bedrock at its base, is estimated to weigh an unbelievable 1,200 tons. Another recently discovered stone nearby is even larger, possibly weighing up to 1,650 tons. While the Romans were undoubtedly skilled builders, the sheer scale of these particular megaliths at Baalbek has led some to question whether they were solely responsible for quarrying and moving them, or if they perhaps built upon an even older, pre-existing megalithic foundation created by an unknown, earlier civilization with even more advanced capabilities. How were such weights manipulated? The orthodox explanations involving ramps, rollers, and vast amounts of manpower strain credulity when faced with the sheer physics involved. Our final destination in this trio of technological marvels takes us back to Egypt, but not to the sun-drenched pyramids. Instead, we descend into the subterranean darkness of the Serapeum of Saqqara. This vast underground complex consists of long galleries, off which branch numerous side chambers, each containing a colossal, highly polished sarcophagus. Officially, the Serapeum served as the burial place for the sacred Apis bulls, manifestations of the god Ptah from around the 18th dynasty onwards. However, it's the sarcophagi themselves that present the true enigma. There are 25 of these massive boxes, predominantly carved from single blocks of incredibly hard stone like Aswan granite, diorite or basalt. Each box with its lid weighs between 70 and 100 tons. They are enormous, often measuring around 13 feet long, 7.5 feet wide, and 11 feet high. But it's not just their size that is astounding, it's the almost unbelievable precision of their construction. The surfaces of these boxes are often perfectly flat, with incredibly sharp, precise internal and external corners. The lids fit onto the boxes with such exactitude that it's said even a razor blade cannot be inserted between them in some cases. The interior surfaces are often as highly polished as the exteriors, even in the deepest, most difficult-to-reach corner. How are these gigantic multi-ton boxes of super-hard stone carved with such incredible accuracy both inside and out? How were they then transported down narrow, sloping tunnels and maneuvered into their tight chambers with such precision? The official explanation is that skilled Egyptian craftsmen achieved this using diorite pounders, copper tools and abrasive powders over immense periods. However, many engineers and independent researchers argue that these methods are simply inadequate to explain the level of precision and the sheer scale of the work, especially on such hard materials. The perceived over-engineering for bull burials has also led to speculation that these boxes might have served an entirely different, unknown purpose, perhaps related to some form of lost technology. At Pumapunku, Baalbek, and the Serapeum, we encounter a recurring theme: stone structures of immense size and extraordinary precision that seem to defy the technological capabilities attributed to their supposed builders. Mainstream archaeology often explains these feats through the lens of immense manpower, unlimited time, and lost or unknown conventional techniques. Yet for many, these explanations feel insufficient. They point to the lack of tools found at these sites that could demonstrably perform such work on hard stone with such accuracy. They ask, where are the advanced chisels, the super drills, the sophisticated lifting devices? The question then becomes, what kind of technology could have achieved these results? Speculation ranges from advanced forms of sonic drilling and cutting to lost techniques of softening stone or even evidence of machine tools that have long since vanished. While these ideas remain firmly in the realm of speculation, the physical evidence at these sites continues to provoke challenging questions. These are not just curiosities, they are profound engineering puzzles etched in stone. Pumapunku's laser-like cuts, Baalbek's titanic megaliths, and the Serapeum's perfectly crafted boxes stand as silent, enduring testaments to a level of ancient technological mastery that we are still struggling to fully comprehend. A mastery that hints at a far more complex and, perhaps technologically advanced past than our history books currently allow. Okay, we now venture into territory that directly challenges one of the most fundamental tenets of both paleontology and anthropology: the vast gulf of time separating humanity from the age of dinosaurs. Our next two sets of artifacts, the Ica stones of Peru and the Acambaro figures of Mexico, present us with alleged ancient depictions that, if authentic, would rewrite natural history as we know it. First, let's journey to the desert region of Ica, Peru, south of Lima. Here, beginning in the 1960s, a local physician named Dr. Javier Cabrera Darquea amassed an extraordinary collection of andesite stones. These stones, ranging in size from small pebbles to larger boulders, are engraved with a bewildering array of intricate images. The collection, eventually numbering the tens of thousands, depicts scenes that are, to put it mildly, anachronistic. Many of the Ica stones show humans interacting directly with various species of dinosaurs, creatures that mainstream science tells us died out approximately 65 million years before the first recognizable humans evolved. We see carvings of men riding on the backs of triceratops-like creatures, people apparently hunting or battling with what look like stegosauruses or apatosauruses, and even detailed depictions of dinosaur anatomy that in some cases seem surprisingly accurate, predating modern paleontological reconstructions. Beyond the dinosaurs, the stones also portray other seemingly advanced or out-of-place knowledge. There are images interpreted as complex surgical procedures, including heart transplants and brain surgery, depictions of telescopes and magnifying glasses, and even what some believe are maps of unknown continents, or representations of ancient global navigation. Dr. Cabrera claimed that the stones were discovered in local caves and ancient riverbeds, and he believed they were the library of a lost, incredibly ancient civilization that possessed knowledge far surpassing our own. He suggested they were a record left behind before a global cataclysm. The immediate and overwhelming response from the scientific community was, and remains, that the Ica stones are modern fakes, clever hoaxes created by local villagers to sell to tourists and collectors like Dr. Cabrera. This skepticism is fueled by several factors. Firstly, the sheer number of stones is problematic. Tens of thousands of intricately carved artifacts would represent an immense undertaking for any ancient culture, let alone a previously unknown one. Secondly, the provenance of the stones is murky. While Dr. Cabrera maintained their ancient origins, a local farmer named Basilio Ushua eventually claimed to have carved many of them himself, learning the techniques and even artificially aging them. However, proponents of the stones' authenticity argue that Ushia's confession may have been coerced or made to avoid legal trouble for selling archaeological artifacts. They also point out that some of the dinosaur depictions show features, like dermal spines on certain sauropods, that were unknown to paleontology in the 1960s, when many of the stones were discovered, only to be confirmed by later fossil finds. This, they argue, suggests an ancient knowledge. Despite these counter-arguments, the lack of verifiable archaeological context, no stones have ever been definitively excavated from an undisturbed ancient stratum by professional archaeologists, and the confessions of local carvers have led to the widespread dismissal of the Ica stones as a fascinating but ultimately modern art project. Yet, for some, they remain a tantalizing what if. Now let's travel north to Acambaro, a town in Guanajuato, Mexico. In 1944, a German-born merchant named Waldemar Julsrud reportedly stumbled upon a collection of bizarre ceramic figurines being unearthed near the base of El Toro Mountain. Over the next several years, tens of thousands of these figures were excavated, forming an equally controversial collection. The Acambaro figures are even more stylistically diverse and in many ways more overtly shocking than the Ica stones. Among the more than 30,000 artifacts are representations of various known dinosaur species: Tyrannosaurus rex, iguanodons, Brachiosauruses, often depicted interacting with humans. Some figurines show people riding dinosaurs, others show dinosaurs attacking humans, and some are simply detailed statuettes of the creatures themselves. Beyond the dinosaurs, the collection includes figurines that seem to represent a bewildering array of cultures and beings: Egyptians, Sumerians, bearded Caucasians, and even creatures that defy easy classification, sometimes described as reptilian humanoids or other strange entities. The sheer eclecticism of the collection is one of its most puzzling aspects. Julsrud, like Cabrera, believed his collection was evidence of a lost ancient civilization that coexisted with dinosaurs. He paid local farmers for each figure they brought him, a practice that critics immediately flagged as a powerful incentive for locals to manufacture fakes. The scientific establishment has almost universally condemned the Acambaro figures as a massive hoax. Early attempts at thermoluminescence, dating in the late 1960s and early 1970s, produced conflicting and controversial results, with some tests suggesting relatively recent dates and others hinting at ages of several thousand years. However, later, more rigorous analyses have generally indicated that the figures were fired in relatively recent times, consistent with modern production. Critics point to the fresh appearance of many of the figures, lacking the patina and degradation one would expect from artifacts supposedly buried for thousands, let alone millions of years. The stylistic inconsistencies and the sheer impossibility of humans and non-avian dinosaurs coexisting, according to all known fossil evidence, are also major arguments against their authenticity. Furthermore, the narrative of their discovery is problematic. The excavations were not conducted with rigorous archaeological controls, and the sheer volume of figures appearing so quickly raised immediate red flags. The idea that local artisans could mass-produce these items for Julsrud, who was known to be an enthusiastic collector, seems a plausible explanation to most archaeologists. Proponents, however, argue that the sheer variety and number of figures would make a hoax on this scale incredibly difficult to perpetrate and sustain for so long. They also point to the detailed anatomical features of some of the dinosaur figurines, claiming they display knowledge that would not have been common at the time of their supposed creation in the mid-20th century. The Ica stones and the Acambaro figures share a common explosive claim: the coexistence of humans and dinosaurs. This directly contradicts the geological and paleontological record, which indicates a 65 million year gap between the extinction of the dinosaurs, excluding birds, and the emergence of Homo sapiens. For these artifacts to be genuine ancient relics depicting such scenes, our entire understanding of Earth's history and human evolution would need to be fundamentally overturned. This is why the scientific consensus is so firmly against their authenticity. The burden of proof for such extraordinary claims is, rightly, extraordinarily high. While the vast majority of scientists and archaeologists consider both collections to be hoaxes, created for profit or to cater to a fascination with the unknown, they persist as popular subjects in circles dedicated to forbidden archaeology and alternative history. They represent a potent challenge to established narratives, even if that challenge is built on what most experts consider to be fabricated foundations. Are the ice stones and Acambaro figures merely clever forgeries, products of human ingenuity and a desire to mystify or profit? Or could they, against all odds and overwhelming scientific consensus, be faint whispers from an impossibly ancient past hinting at a world where humans walked with giants of a different reptilian kind? For now, they remain firmly in the realm of the forbidden, artifacts that provoke debate and disbelief in equal measure. For our final exploration into the realm of forbidden archaeology, we tackle a subject that challenges the very narrative of how our world became connected, the deeply controversial idea of extensive pre-Columbian transoceanic contact. The orthodox historical view, long taught in schools, is that Christopher Columbus, in 1492, was the first European to discover the Americas, effectively initiating contact between the Old World of Europe, Asia, and Africa and the New World. While Norse voyages to parts of North America around the year 1000 of the Christian era are now generally accepted, the notion of other, earlier, or more widespread contacts by civilizations from across the Atlantic or Pacific remains largely on the fringes of mainstream historical and archaeological thought. Yet, a compelling and diverse body of evidence, often dismissed or downplayed, suggests that ancient mariners may have been crossing the vast oceans far earlier and more frequently than we commonly believe. One of the most intriguing lines of evidence comes from the world of botany. The presence of certain plants in both the Old and New Worlds prior to 1492 raises significant questions. For example, traces of nicotine, a substance derived from tobacco, a plant native to the Americas, and cocaine, derived from the cocoa plant, also native to South America, have been reportedly found in some ancient Egyptian mummies. These findings, first published in the early 1990s by German toxicologist Dr. Svetlana Balabanova, were met with intense skepticism and accusations of contamination or misinterpretation. However, subsequent studies by other researchers have claimed to replicate some of these findings, suggesting that these psychoactive substances, indigenous to the Americas, somehow made their way to ancient Egypt. How could this be possible without transoceanic voyages? Similarly, depictions of what appear to be maize or corn, a staple crop domesticated in Mesoamerica, have been identified in ancient Hindu temple carvings in India, dating to centuries before Columbus. Sweet potatoes, originating in South America, have also been found in Polynesia, with linguistic and genetic evidence suggesting they arrived there well before European contact in the Pacific. While natural dispersal by birds or floating vegetation is sometimes proposed, deliberate human transport seems a more direct explanation for many of these botanical anomalies. Beyond plants, we find perplexing cultural and architectural parallels between civilizations separated by vast oceans. Consider the striking similarities between step pyramids in Mesoamerica, like those of the Maya and Aztecs, and the ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia, or even some temple structures in Southeast Asia. While independent invention is the commonly accepted explanation, the resemblances in form and cosmic alignment are, for some, too specific to be mere coincidence. Religious motifs and cosmological beliefs also show surprising overlaps. The concept of a feathered serpent deity, for instance, is prominent in Mesoamerica with figures like Quetzalcoatl, yet it finds echoes in dragon or serpent figures associated with wisdom and creation in parts of Asia and the Middle East. Shared flood myths, complex calendrical systems, and specific artistic motifs found on opposite sides of the world hint at a possible diffusion of ideas through ancient contact. Then there are the more direct, though often highly debated, archaeological finds. Reports of so-called out-of-place artifacts surface periodically. Roman coins allegedly found in Venezuela, Hebrew inscriptions claimed to be discovered in North American burial mounds, or ancient Chinese ceramics supposedly unearthed in pre-Columbian sites in the Americas. Many of these finds are dismissed by mainstream archaeology as hoaxes, misidentifications, or items brought over much later and then lost, or deliberately planted. The lack of clear, undisturbed archaeological context for many such discoveries makes them difficult to verify and easy to critique. However, the sheer volume and persistence of these claims keep the debate alive. One of the most famous and well-documented cases supporting pre-Columbian contact is the Lanceau Meadows site in Newfoundland, Canada. This is an authenticated 11th century Norse settlement, proving that Vikings did indeed reach North America centuries before Columbus. While this specific instance is accepted, it opens the door to the possibility that if one European group could make the journey, others from different parts of the world, perhaps with different maritime technologies, might also have been capable of similar feats at various times. Ancient maps also provide tantalizing, though controversial clues. The Piri-Reis map of 1513, for instance, appears to depict parts of the South American coastline and even Antarctica, supposedly ice-free, with a degree of accuracy that seems astonishing for its time, leading some to speculate it was based on far older source maps from a lost seafaring civilization. The resistance from mainstream academia to the idea of widespread pre-Columbian contact is significant. The doctrine of independent invention, the idea that similar cultural traits or technologies can arise independently in different parts of the world without direct contact, is a powerful and often valid explanatory framework. To accept extensive transoceanic voyages by various ancient cultures would require a major re-evaluation of civilizational development and the interconnectedness of the ancient world. There are also concerns about the misuse of diffusionist theories, which in the past were sometimes employed to support colonialist or racist narratives, by suggesting that indigenous cultures were incapable of developing complexity on their own and must have received it from outside. Modern proponents of ancient contact theories are generally careful to avoid such implications, focusing instead on mutual exchange and the sophisticated maritime capabilities of diverse ancient peoples. The evidence for pre-Columbian transoceanic contact is like a complex mosaic, with some pieces fitting together convincingly and others remaining frustratingly ambiguous or easily challenged. Botanical anomalies, striking cultural parallels, enigmatic artifacts, and ancient maps all contribute to a picture that suggests our ancestors may have been far more adventurous and interconnected than the standard historical narrative allowed. Was the ancient world a patchwork of isolated civilizations, each developing in a vacuum until the age of exploration? Or were the oceans not barriers, but highways, carrying ships and ideas between continents, creating a subtly interwoven global culture long before we imagine? The evidence, though often suppressed or dismissed, continues to surface, inviting us to question the received wisdom and consider a past far more connected and perhaps far more surprising than we have been led to believe. And that is it. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Purple Files, click the like button, and drop a comment down below. More videos to come, and until then, thanks for watching.